Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you. Hello there. Well, this is just a quick video because last night there was a development with child abuse. Many of you will have watched my documentary, my YouTube documentary that I made called Jehovah's Witnesses and Child Abuse, Is There a Problem? And in that I mentioned the October 1st, 2012 letter that Watchtower sent out to all elders, and I basically described one or two of the problems with that letter. Well, that letter that was basically guidelines on how to handle cases of child sex abuse was sent out in the wake of the Candace Conti lawsuit that was all the way back in 2012 when that first judgment came through. And we're now in 2016, and amazingly we have a new letter being sent out by Watchtower to all elders, which I think it's safe to assume is a response to the rather scathing assessment of the Australian Royal Commission, or at least it seems to try to want to respond to some of the recommendations that were put forward by the Australian Royal Commission, but in my opinion it fails, I'm afraid. But anyway, here is the August 1st, 2016 letter to elders on child abuse. I won't be putting a link in the description, but I will be putting a link to a Reddit discussion about this letter where it should be fairly easy to find a download link so that you can check for yourself. Now, for the sake of time, I will try not to read the entire letter, but I obviously do want to just discuss one or two of paragraphs of interest to me or concern to me. I'll begin with paragraph 3. It says, from the Bible's standpoint, child sexual abuse is a gross sin. And then it lists two scriptures, Deuteronomy 23:17 and 18, and Galatians 5:19 to 21. Now you can look up both those scriptures if you like, but you will find that neither expressly refer to child sexual molestation. It is simply wrong to say that the Bible condemns child sex abuse, because the Bible is silent on the subject. Yes, there are verses that refer to incest and, for example, prohibit a father from having sex with his daughter or a mother from having sex with her son, but those aren't necessarily to do with children. There is no verse in the Bible that says you cannot have sex with a child. There should be, but there isn't. So I just thought it was worthwhile pointing that out, that from the very beginning we're only in the 3rd paragraph and already it's saying something that isn't actually true. It goes on to say, Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child sexual abuse. Thus the congregation will not shield any perpetrator of such repugnant acts from the consequences of his sin. Now, it's all very well saying that, but if you insist that pedophiles shouldn't be shielded from the consequences of what they've done, you then need to spell out exactly how you intend to make sure that doesn't happen. And in this letter, I'm afraid there isn't anything nearly robust enough to suggest that that will be the case moving forward. So paragraph 4 says, the scriptures place the responsibility on parents for teaching and protecting their children. As spiritual shepherds, elders can help parents to shoulder their scriptural responsibility. Our publications and website contain much helpful information to assist parents, and then it gives a load of references to material that's discussed child abuse in the past. Now, the problem with material in Watchtower publications that touches on child abuse, I've repeatedly said this, I'm waiting to be proven wrong. I won't be proven wrong because this is the case. There is no material on child abuse that says go to the police. If you are a victim of child abuse or your child is a victim of child molestation, go to the police. You would think that would be one of the first things that you would say if you were writing, say, an article on child abuse. But nowhere do Watchtower publications say that. So it's fairly pointless giving a big long list of all of your material that is supposed to help parents manage this situation when absolutely none of it says the fairly rudimentary obvious thing, which is that child abuse is a crime and therefore should be investigated urgently as a crime by the authorities. Paragraph 5, legal considerations. It says, in some jurisdictions, individuals who learn of an allegation of child abuse may be obligated by law to report the allegation to the secular authorities. In all cases, the victim and her parents have the absolute right to report an allegation to the authorities. Now, it's great that Watchtower no longer, as it did do in the past, feels it has to interfere with those who, like, for example, parents who wish to report child molestation to the police. They used to have basically a policy whereby if you went to the authorities, you were potentially slandering somebody, and if the elders weren't satisfied that he had committed paedophilia or child molestation according to the two-witness rule, it used to be very heavily stigmatized. The policy now is the parents have the right to go to the police. But the crucial flaw is that in this policy, it doesn't tell elders to tell parents to go to the police. There's a difference between not dissuading parents from going to the police and recognizing their right to go to the police and actively encouraging them, especially when you have a culture where the parents are trained to trust elders to deal with this situation. So it's basically a missed opportunity for Watchtower to say to elders, encourage parents to go to the police. It doesn't say that. Instead, it says the parents have the absolute right to report the allegation. It doesn't say remind them that they have the right to report the allegation. And also this point about in some jurisdictions, individuals who learn of child abuse may be obligated by law to report the allegation. I mentioned this in my child abuse documentary. It shouldn't just be about whether it's in the law or not. It should be about whether it's morally right or not. And in cases of child abuse, if you are aware that an individual is a child molester and you know that, of course you should immediately go to the authorities, whether you are commanded to do it by law or not, because it's the right thing to do. It shouldn't matter whether the law demands that you do it. It should matter that children are protected and, you know, a pedophile is brought to justice. And yet still Watchtower is basically trying to find loopholes that would allow it to get out of reporting a pedophile if it can, as I say, find the loophole in the local law that absolves it from the absolute duty to the legal duty to report child molesters. So disturbing that after all of the court cases and after the Royal Commission and everything, Watchtower still hasn't cottoned on to the fact that never mind what the local reporting laws are, it is their moral duty to protect not just witness children against pedophiles, but also children in the wider community against pedophiles. Point 6, to ensure that elders comply with child abuse reporting laws, 2 elders should immediately call the legal department for legal advice when the elders learn of an accusation of child abuse. A call should be made even when both persons involved are minors. The elders should not ask an alleged victim the accused person, or anyone else to call the legal department on the elder's behalf. And then it says the elders should call the legal department even in the following situations, and it lists a number of situations. The first two, the alleged abuse occurred many years ago. The alleged abuse is based on the testimony of only one witness. So there's the first of a handful of nudges or hints towards the two-witness rule. The interesting thing I should mention about this letter is that it very carefully avoids expressly invoking the two-witness rule, that you have to have two witnesses in order for an accusation of child abuse to merit a judicial investigation. It very carefully avoids doing that, even though it was done very, very clearly in the October 1st, 2012 letter. Here it's it's not mentioned at all, but there are one or two hints, and that's the first hint where it says, even if there's only one witness. But the point here is that, again, elders are basically being asked to refer to the branch, refer to the legal department in all cases. They are not allowed to take the initiative and exercise their personal moral obligation to notify the police because they've just found out there is a pedophile on the loose. So it's, again, a missed opportunity to treat child abuse with the gravity that it merits. Paragraph 7, the legal department will provide legal advice based on the facts and the applicable law. And then later it says, after speaking with the legal department, the call will be transferred to the service department so that elders can receive further assistance. So the gist of it seems to be that the legal department establishes, what are the reporting requirements, what are the reporting duties, where does this stand legally? And then they hand over to the service department, and then it's more or less the service department who handles everything from there. And when I say everything, I mean everything. This is an interesting one. Paragraph 10 has the heading Congregation Considerations. It says, when discussing child sexual abuse from a congregation standpoint, we are not discussing a situation in which a minor who is a willing participant and who is approaching adulthood is involved in sexual activity with an adult who is a few years older than the minor. Nor, generally speaking, are we discussing situations in which only minors are involved. Rather, we are referring to an adult guilty of sexually abusing a minor who is a young child, or an adult guilty of sexual involvement with a minor who is approaching adulthood but was not a willing participant. Now, that I find very troubling, to talk in terms of whether a child is or is not a willing participant. Because if you are a child and an adult induces you or seduces you into having sex, regardless of what's going through your mind, you are not a willing participant, at least not as far as the law's concerned. You've been groomed. You cannot be a willing participant in sex if you are a minor having sex with an adult. At least in my opinion, that seems fairly straightforward. So I find it troubling that Watchtower is talking in terms of whether a child who's a victim of child sex abuse is a willing participant or not. And you can imagine the Pandora's box of problems that this would open when it comes to elders questioning victims of child sex abuse and trying to establish whether or not they were willing participants. So I guess I would, there are experts who probably need to look at this, but from my personal perspective, I find that very problematic. Paragraph 11, providing spiritual assistance to victims. As elders provide ongoing spiritual shepherding, it is especially important that they demonstrate empathy and compassion to victims of child sexual abuse and their families. Now, this whole paragraph seems to be an attempt at taking on board some of the advice that was given at the Royal Commission in Australia, which seemed to highlight some grave problems with the way elders were approaching these matters. It goes on to say, in the case of any discussion with a child abuse victim who is still a minor, an elder should never meet alone with the minor, but should always involve another elder and another adult member of the congregation, preferably the minor's parents. If it is not possible to include the parent, for example, if the parent is the accused, then another adult member of the congregation who is a confidant of the victim should be included. In addition to the spiritual shepherding provided by the elders, the victim or her family may desire other assistance. For example, the victim or her family may decide to consult a mental health professional. This would be a personal decision for them to make. So, as hard as Watchtower seems to be trying to comply with some of the suggestions that were given at the Royal Commission, we still have a scenario where it's two elders, who are basically doing the questioning in a case of child sexual molestation. And as was pointed out at the Royal Commission, it isn't always advantageous for it to be two men who are looking into a matter of this kind. Usually, it needs to be women who, for example, a female victim of child sex abuse would feel more comfortable, relating to in such traumatic circumstances. But that was basically completely dismissed. Jeffrey Jackson made it clear that it would always have to be elders who would investigate, and that's being stuck to here. I'm impressed that it at least is more open to the idea of mental health professionals being involved, but again, it doesn't say to elders, well, you should advise the victim to seek professional mental assistance. It just says, well, that's a personal decision for them to make. So it allows it, but it doesn't encourage it. Paragraph 13 is headed Investigating Allegations. And this is, again, where it's very strongly hinted at the two-witness rule. It says, the elders may learn of an allegation of child sexual abuse directly from the victim, through her parents, or through a trusted confidant of the victim. After receiving assistance from the branch office, everything goes through the branch office, the body of elders will appoint two elders to conduct a scriptural investigation of every allegation of child sexual abuse. These elders should carefully follow scriptural procedures and the Bible-based direction outlined in this letter and in the shepherding textbook, particularly chapter 5. Now, this is my copy of the shepherding textbook, and you'll be disturbed to know that chapter 5, let me just double check, I want to be absolutely sure on this. Yes, chapter 5 is headed Determining Whether a Judicial Committee Should Be Formed, and it's on page 72 of chapter 5 that we get this awful paragraph. If the accused denies the accusation, and it specifically mentions that this also applies to child abuse, and it says, if the accuser or the accused is unwilling to meet with the elders, or if the accused continues to deny the accusation of a single witness and the wrongdoing is not established, the elders will leave matters in Jehovah's hands. That is, in essence, the two-witness rule, and very cleverly, rather than explicitly mention the two-witness rule, what Watchtower has done here is it said to elders, you should investigate these situations scripturally and according to what we've written in chapter 5 of the Shepherd book, which elders will know mentions the two-witness rule. So very clever how they've done this. They seem to have written this letter knowing that it will be pored over by critics of the organisation such as myself, and by legal, by courts of law and by the Royal Commission again in the future, and they're trying to distance themselves a little bit from the two-witness rule without dropping it entirely. So the two-witness rule is still in force. They're just not making quite so much noise about it as they did in the October 1st, 2012 letter. It goes on to say, elders should remember that during the investigation process and during the judicial committee process, a victim of child sexual abuse is not required to make her allegation in the presence of the alleged abuser. In the exceptional event that the two elders believe it is necessary to interview a minor who is a victim of child sexual abuse, the elders should first contact the service department. In the next paragraph, judicial committee, paragraph 14, if the body of elders concludes that there is sufficient scriptural evidence, that's another hint towards the two-witness rule, to warrant the formation of a congregation judicial committee on the grounds of child sexual abuse, the coordinator of the body of elders should first contact the circuit overseer. The circuit overseer will designate an experienced elder to serve as chairman of the judicial committee and, if needed, the appeal committee. If wrongdoing is established and the wrongdoer is not repentant, he should be disfellowshipped. On the other hand, if the wrongdoer is repentant and is reproved, the reproof should be announced to the congregation. This announcement will serve as a protection for the congregation. Now, this is a major point. It's a point that was brought to the attention of Watchtower during the Royal Commission. They don't seem to have got the message that if a child molester, an alleged child molester, goes through a judicial committee and the elders decide not to disfellowship, to instead reprove because this individual seems to be repentant, you are not protecting the congregation by making an announcement that says, Brother Smith has been reproved. That does not protect children in the congregation if Brother Smith happens to be a pedophile. It just doesn't protect them at all. They don't know why he's been reproved. It could be for smoking, it could be for having the wrong kind of employment. Goodness knows what it's for. And yet Watchtower still seems to think that simply reproving somebody and announcing that reproval is a protection of the congregation in cases of child sex abuse. So very disturbing that they still haven't got that message. Paragraph 17, restrictions. The elders should carefully adhere to all direction provided by the service department regarding reasonable steps that should be taken to protect minors from one who has engaged in child sexual abuse. For example, the service department will provide direction when 1. A congregation judicial committee determines that one guilty of child sexual abuse is repentant and will remain in the congregation. 2. One disfellowshipped for child sexual abuse is reinstated. 3. When an unbaptized publisher or a baptized member of the congregation who denies an accusation of child sexual abuse is convicted by the secular authorities. Or 4. One viewed as a child molester by the community or the congregation becomes a publisher or becomes a baptized member of the congregation. So again, everything goes through the service department. Elders are not allowed to take the initiative to act according to their personal duty. Everything goes through the service department, and the service department decides exactly how, in its view, minors in a congregation are to be protected. Paragraph 18. Direction from the service department to the elders will include restrictions imposed on an individual's activities within the congregation, on his participation in the field ministry, and on his interactions with minors. The elders will be directed to caution the individual never to be alone with a minor, not to cultivate friendships with minors, not to display affection for minors, and so forth. In some cases, the service department may specifically direct elders to inform parents of minors within the congregation of the need to monitor their children's interaction with an individual. Now, there is a giddying amount of naivety here. The service department seems to think that it can keep a lid on a pedophile who is in a congregation simply by telling that pedophile, don't be around kids, don't go in the ministry with kids, don't display affection for kids. You know, the whole point of pedophilia and recognizing pedophilia as a crime is that criminals can say one thing and do another if they are sufficiently desperate. But there's so much naivety here because the service department seems to think that it can control the situation just by telling elders to tell the pedophile what he shouldn't do. And that, in my view, isn't just naive, it's actually negligent to assume that you can control the situation in that way. This part about the service department specifically directing elders to inform parents of minors of the need to monitor their children's interaction, that was actually already mentioned in the October 1st, 2012 letter, and there was a lot more detail there. And again, it all basically boils down to the service department having the final say in how things are done, and the service department, if it wants to, directing elders that they can warn parents. It's not done in all cases. They're basically saying if they want to do it, if they feel they need to do it, then they will direct elders to do it. But elders, again, will not be able to take the initiative. And even if they know that Brother Smith is a pedophile and they can see him attending meetings on a weekly basis, that alone does not, they're still not allowed to discreetly approach parents and say, you really do not want to allow little Jimmy to be with Brother Smith. They're not allowed to do that. Only if the service department tells them that they can do that. Only then can they do it. So it's basically the service department is controlling the situation by remote control without necessarily knowing all of the nuances and all of the different variables. They are basically controlling the whole thing from an office somewhere in New York or wherever the branch office happens to be. Paragraph 19. This is actually a good paragraph. One who has engaged in child sexual abuse does not qualify to receive any privileges in the congregation for many years, if ever. I think you could have just said ever, but anyway. This includes seemingly minor privileges. Elders should keep in mind what is stated in the January 1st, 1997 Watchtower article, Let Us Abhor What Is Wicked, page 29, paragraph 2. Child sexual abuse reveals an unnatural fleshly weakness. Experience has shown that such an adult may well molest other children. True, not every child molester repeats the sin, but many do, and the congregation cannot read hearts to tell who is or who is not liable to molest children again. Hence, Paul's counsel to Timothy applies with special force in the case of baptized adults who have molested children. Never lay your hands hastily upon any man, neither be a sharer in the sins of others. Therefore, if the body of elders believes that one who has engaged in child sexual abuse decades ago may now qualify for minor privileges, such as carrying or adjusting microphones, operating audio-video equipment, or assisting with accounts, literature, magazine, or territories, they should assign 2 elders to call the service department. The assigned elders should call the service department before any congregation privileges are extended. Now, this paragraph is by no means perfect. As I mentioned, it should really be tightened up to say nobody who molests a child will ever be given a position of trust, will ever be put in a role where they are looked up to and it is assumed that they are a trustworthy person, that, for example, a child may be able to spend time with. It could say that far more definitively than to say one who is engaged in child sexual abuse does not qualify to receive any privileges in the congregations for many years, if ever. Again, it should just say it's never going to happen. But having said that, I suppose it's good that at least this paragraph, which is going to be read by all of the elders, it at least gets the point across that that there is this issue of child molesters offending again, and therefore they shouldn't be given these privileges. If I were an elder reading it, that's how I would read it. And the scripture in 1 Timothy about laying your hands hastily upon any man, that directly applies to appointments for new elders. That's what laying your hands on someone is supposed to mean, I believe, in this context. So it could be more bulletproof, definitely. It could be far more to the point, but I suppose it's still better than the previous letter, or it's much better than the previous letter, the October 1st, 2012 letter, where it said, it can never be said that one who has abused a child will never qualify to serve as an elder, or it said something along those lines. I forget the exact words. This paragraph is much better than that. Paragraph 20, filing. Information concerning individuals associated with the congregation and accused of child sexual abuse, established or not, including letters of introduction, should be placed in an envelope labelled with the individual's name and marked "Do Not Destroy." This envelope should be kept indefinitely in the congregation's confidential file. I'm highlighting this because of the irony that you can have really urgent information that will affect the safety of children in a kingdom hall that is sitting in an envelope in the congregation's safe. And the people who need that information, the parents or the young children, don't have access to it. It's only the elders who have access to this information, unless the service department, in its infinite wisdom, decides to let parents know, but that is by no means a given. So many areas in which this is again a missed opportunity. Paragraph 21, moving to another congregation. It says a little bit further down, the congregation service committee should not send any information to the new congregation until after receiving legal advice from the legal department and direction from the service department. Now that struck me as extremely problematic, because if you're an elder in congregation A and you know you have a pedophile who is moving to congregation B, let's say you have a friend who's an elder in congregation B, you should absolutely be able to immediately pick up the phone and say, "Hi Bob, you really need to know that Brother Smith, who's moving to your hall, is a pedophile. You really need to know that, and do what you can to make sure he has no access to children." Elders aren't allowed to do that. They have to first contact the legal department and the service department. So they are literally, even in that small area, their hands are tied. It used to be that I think the service committee would write a letter of introduction to the next congregation, with or without the say-so of the branch, and let them know that themselves. But that's changed now. Everything now, absolutely everything, goes through the legal desk and the service desk. And it says, if the individual is disfellowshipped and living within the congregation's territory. I'll just back up a little bit. When the elders are informed that an individual who has been accused of child sexual abuse, established or not, has moved into the congregation, two elders should immediately call the legal department. This should be done even if the individual is disfellowshipped or is in prison and has transferred from another facility or is released. And then it says, if the individual is disfellowshipped and living within the congregation's territory, the elders should list that address on the appropriate congregation territory card as a do not call. So rather than warn all parents, look, we have a disfellowshipped pedophile living on our territory, whatever you do, don't let your kids go to this address. Instead, it's just a matter of, oh, well, let's make it a do not call. Now, if you're watching this video and you've never been a witness, let me just explain that a do not call is literally just a house that you are marked to not call at, perhaps because the individual has said they don't want to be bothered by witnesses again. So all witnesses have a list for each street of numbers that they're not allowed to call at. Now, the problem with this list is that it takes very little when you are working the streets to just get distracted. Maybe you're intensely occupied in a conversation and forget what the do not calls are. And it happens all the time. It happened to me all the time, and I was aware of it happening to others all the time. That you just get distracted, you get into the flow, you get into the routine, and before you know it, you've called on a do not call. Well, just imagine if it was a child and a witness, and they were blindsided, they forgot it was a do not call, and they get invited in. You can imagine all sorts of ways that this can go wrong. But again, it's an example of enormous naivety on the part of Watchtower, that they feel they can just remote control the situation by saying things like, we'll just make sure it's a do not call. And then in the next paragraph, paragraph 23, it says similarly, notification by secular authorities. From time to time, secular authorities may inform the elders that a sex offender is living in the area. The notice may provide the address of the individual and may state the nature of his criminal activity. In such a case, the elders should list that address on the appropriate congregation territory card as a do not call. So again, unbelievable naivety. The do not call system, which is basically, it was designed to stop witnesses from harassing members of the public who felt strongly against having witnesses call on them. That's why the do not call system was introduced, and now it's basically being used to shelter young witnesses from pedophiles. Paragraph 26 is titled Notations in the Shepherding Textbook, and it basically has a list of all the places in the Shepherd book where elders are supposed to say, refer to this letter. But I found it interesting that at the end it said, in addition, each elder should cross out chapter 12, paragraphs 20 to 21. So elders are actually being asked to cross out completely 2 paragraphs from chapter 12. And those paragraphs are, if you remember, I was talking before about the situation where a pedophile moves from congregation A to congregation B. And it used to be that elders could have a little bit of initiative in warning the next congregation, but now they have to do everything through the service desk. Well, that's changed, and because that's changed, elders now have to cross out those 2 paragraphs. And it just makes you think, well, this thing was published in 2010, and we're now in 2016, and we're already in a situation where entire paragraphs of this thing are getting crossed out. What's the point of having it? If the directions to elders can be out of date so quickly, you might as well just have everything going off letters, because clearly the faithful and discreet slave's direction is so temporary that it doesn't stand the test of time. And finally, paragraph 27, it concludes, it is imperative to adhere to the direction in this letter each time a matter involving child abuse comes to your attention. This will serve to uphold the sanctity of Jehovah's name to protect minors. Your full cooperation with this direction is appreciated. May Jehovah grant you knowledge, wisdom, and discernment as you care for this and other weighty matters in connection with the flock of God entrusted to your care, your brothers, Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. So, I've breezed through it and read the parts that are of most interest to me. Probably when you read it, you'll find other things that interest you or disturb you. I guess the main takeaway, and I've kept saying it as I've been reading it, is it's a missed opportunity. This would have been the letter where Watchtower finally said, or it could have been the letter where Watchtower finally said, listen, when you hear of the crime of child abuse, notify the authorities in the same way as you would notify the authorities if you heard of the crime of murder. That's how you're to treat child abuse. Ring the service desk, ring the legal desk if you want advice on how to implement what the authorities tell you, or how the authorities, respond to the situation. But it's them who should investigate, who should establish whether it's happened or not. That isn't absolutely not what this letter says. Instead, everything is micromanaged by the service desk. The only, if I was to be positive and look for a good development in this letter, it would be the paragraph that talks about privileges. Again, it's not as watertight as it should be. It does still slightly leave the door open for someone to potentially have privileges in the future if it happened decades and decades and decades ago. But if I were an elder reading that, I would be thinking, well, there you have it. Someone who's molested a child can't have privileges in the future. And again, it mentioned the scripture in Timothy about not laying your hands on someone hastily. So that, I think, let's give credit where credit's due. That, I think, is a positive element from the letter. But apart from that, even though it doesn't expressly mention the two-witness rule, that's basically more for political reasons. It does still have hints to the two-witness rule. The fingerprints of the two-witness rule are on this letter, and that's demonstrated by the fact that it tells elders to refer to chapter 5 as the ultimate authority, and as I've shown you, chapter 5 is where that horrendous paragraph is found, telling elders to leave matters in Jehovah's hands if there isn't a second witness. So again, missed opportunity to bring Watchtower's child abuse policies in line with modern understanding about pedophilia and about the risks that are posed when you fail to report as a matter of urgency when a child is molested. And it's sad. I'm genuinely saddened by this. I would have loved, when I saw this letter come up in my inbox, because it was emailed to me, when I saw this letter come up, I was thinking, is this the letter? Is this the letter where they finally get it? And no, I'm sorry, it isn't. And as much as I would like to just drop it and say, oh, well, we tried, this is affecting people's lives. There are children who will be molested because of the failure to address the problems in this letter. Make no mistake about that. When you look at the kind of numbers that were discussed at the Australian Royal Commission, the fact that in 50 years, 1,006 pedophiles were recorded on Watchtower's books, that's the kind of rate that we're talking about. And I did my breakdown of numbers in my video to show you how that number only goes up the more Jehovah's Witnesses there are over time. So this is a very, very urgent problem, and Watchtower isn't doing enough. They're just not doing enough. So please download the letter yourself and make of it what you will, but those are my thoughts on it. I'm now going to get back to writing my book, but I understand there will be an article about this on JW Survey by Covert Fade, so look out for that. Apart from that, I hope you have found this video interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.